Hey sexies.
Girl, what is this? Oh my god, I cannot believe that I did not even think about touching up before I made this video. Look at my lips, that shit looks crusty. I am so sorry because it has been bothering me as I was editing this video, so I apologize guys, but let's pretend that it's not there and pretend that I look good, okay? Thank you. Sorry once again.
It's also Beulah. Today I want to talk about something that I've been meaning to talk about for a long time, but I was not sure how people would react to it. However, I feel like as a woman of color, I should just add to the discourse and get it over with. I hope that if you are watching this, you at least understand or try to understand where I, as a woman of color, am coming from regarding this topic and this discussion. So today what I'm going to be talking about is bimboism, and it heavily relies on the recent trend where bimboism is coming back. And it has come back as a more empowering thing where white women have claimed this identity and remodeled it as something empowering, and we love to see that. We love to see women reclaiming derogatory words that were given to them by men and using it to uplift themselves. We love it. However, today I want to add to this discourse as a woman of color, and I want to talk about how, in my opinion, bimboism only benefits white women and actually does not benefit women of color. When I'm talking about women of color, I'm including Native American women, black women, and any other non-white women. So let's get into the video. To begin with, it's important to understand what bimboism really means. Bimboism is a word that describes a woman who is heavily sexualized. She's very preppy and wears a lot of makeup and is usually airheaded. And men find them very attractive because of the way that they carry themselves, like their body and makeup and the way they dress. At the same time, it's demeaning because while men find them attractive, men think of them as dumb and kind of does not think that they have their own personality and their own choice in a way. So recently, especially on TikTok, bimbofication and bimboism has been blowing up, and it is a thing now. And of course, the ones that I saw were of white women being bimbos. I have yet to see a woman of color be a bimbo, because the whole word bimbo is kind of to describe a woman who is really white and have blonde hair and the whole plastic look. And if you want to really know that what they look like, you could just do a little quick Google search and you'll see what I'm talking about, and that proves my point. However, I just want to say how bimboism has rebranded, and I feel like it has also gone above the classic white and blonde look. So a lot of people have been reclaiming that too, where they act like a bimbo, where they try to be dumb even though they're not, because it's really easy to fool men and take advantage of them, and that's the whole point. It's like, oh, like femme fatale, in a way, but just more bubblegummy, if that makes any sense. But I want to talk about why it only really benefits white women and kind of does not benefit women of color. So if we really talk about bimboism and how it works, it is heavily reliant on the male gaze, and that's the whole point, at least recently, is that you take the male gaze and you take advantage of that for your own advantage. And that's great. We love that. Same thing with femme fatale. T-Nor made a really great video about that. I'll put the link. But I doubt anyone who's watching this have not watched them. But yeah, femme fatale is heavily reliant on the male gaze, and so is bimboism. The whole concept and term for bimboism does come from the male gaze, and it's men who really coined this term to describe a certain type of women. The reason it's important to talk about the male gaze and its relation to women of color versus white women is because we know the male gaze is basically what is seen as attractive and what is seen as beautiful. And we all know that those standards of attractiveness and beautiful is very white and it's very Eurocentric, right? It's very skinny and fat phobic. And that's why it's important to talk about this, because when we look into the male gaze and understand how it, comes up and how it's beneficial, we see that it's white women who are benefiting, and it's white women who are falling under the standards of the male gaze. Whether or not we like to admit it, it is true that the beauty standards that most of us follow is coined by men, and it's unfortunate, but I feel like many queer and fat and people of color have started to move away from the male gaze and have started to express themselves in their own way, as they should. Now, the reason I'm talking about the whiteness of the male gaze and the male gaze in general is because women of color have a hard time fitting under these beauty standards that are coined by the male gaze. Therefore, they're going to have a hard time being a bimbo and passing as a bimbo, or having any advantage as a bimbo. If you're not seen as attractive, how are you going to take advantage of the male gaze in the first place? When the standards are not set for you, there is really no way for you to fit under those standards and take advantage of it in return. So that's one way that I feel like bimboism does not favor women of color. Bimboism also has a lot to do with femininity. It is a woman who's hyper feminine and, the color pink, and wears a lot of makeup, and, smells very perfumey, and all of those. And historically, we have seen how many women of color, especially brown and black women, have been masculinized. There's a very hard, true history of black women literally being equated to men and be treated as men, and we still see in many platforms where brown women and black women are compared to men and are called derogatory stuff, and is heavily masculinized. And I feel like that takes a lot away from their femininity, and women of color always had a hard time to be seen feminine enough, and I think that's something that white women is able to get away with. And that's why I feel like a lot of white feminism has to deal with being feminine and dealing with their femininity and protecting that femininity. In fact, if we look back to the 1920s women's rights movement, we see how white women use their femininity to kind of fight for their rights, but at the same time make sure that those rights only are limited to white women, because at the end of the day, it wasn't about women or all women. At the end of the day, it was about their own femininity and their own protection. And we've seen how these white women back in the 1920s, and white women still till this day, use their fragile femininity to protect themselves. And I think that we all understand and see how the white male has always thought for it to be important to protect their white women, and because they're fragile and they're feminine and they're soft. And while this is demeaning to white women, obviously, because it's very misogynistic, it also puts them in a place where they are protected no matter what, because of this femininity that is handed to them. Whereas women of color, that femininity is taken away from them, which puts them in a very violent and vulnerable position where they are more likely to be facing violence and harassment and all of the above. All in all, what I'm trying to say is that it's easy for white women to claim their femininity and to be seen as feminine, whereas women of color don't have that luxury. And white women, that femininity that they have, that actually protects them, whereas the lack of femininity amongst women of color puts them in a position where they're vulnerable and more susceptible to violence. Next part that I want to touch upon is survival, and by this I mean that a lot of women of color have to carry themselves or express themselves in a way where they are respected and seen as smart and valuable by society. Therefore, they have to present themselves and carry themselves a certain way, whereas I feel like white women don't really have to do that, and they could have best of the both worlds. This is important to highlight because I feel like choice is a big thing when it comes to bimboism, because people choose to be bimbos in this new era, right? But I feel like a lot of women of color cannot choose to be a bimbo. I feel like white women, because of their femininity, the way they're protected, right, they could choose to be an airhead, whereas I feel like women of color are mocked so much, right? They cannot show an ounce of weakness, or else they're gonna get attacked by their own community and people from outside of the community. So they cannot choose to be an airhead, and instead they have to show that they're stronger than they are. They have to show that they're smarter than they are, to get somewhere in life. I feel like for women of color, survival is to, put yourself out there to be respected and not let them see a part of you that's vulnerable, because they are going to try to tear you down constantly. I feel like white women get to have that choice of, trying to be an airhead and still be protected and not, seem as completely worthless, is what I'm trying to get at. I feel like oftentimes women of color have to put twice as much of effort to get to a place where a white woman is, like in a workplace or in academia, because we all constantly have to prove that we are smart and we are worth it, we do belong here, because we are always made to feel like we don't belong. So I feel like out of survival and out of all the expectations that women of color have put on them, they cannot really choose to present themselves as an airhead, because again, survival. People won't respect them. I feel like people will constantly walk over them. And even to be in spaces that are seemed important enough, if a woman of color chooses to present themselves as dumb as an airhead, they're definitely never going to ever be able to step into that space, right? That's respectable. But I feel like white women can be however they want and get wherever they want, because for them there is no system of oppression. For them, it's choice, it's your life, it's you, it's individual. But for us, it's not. So yeah, I think that basically sums up why I think bimboism really doesn't benefit at least majority of women of color, and is very white and very skinny, if that makes sense. I think if we also wanted, we could also touch on the topic of how bimboism is fat phobic, but I think that falls under the male gaze. Like the male gaze is very skinny and white and very Eurocentric. So I think we all know that bimboism is heavily skinny based. But yeah, that's all I had to discuss, and I hope you guys understand and at least take in this perspective and talk about it, or just apply it and understand this position of women of color in this discourse. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.